Feel free to check out my TeePublic after the video, and support me on Patreon. Watch till the end of the video for more. Akira Kurosawa is easily one of the most influential filmmakers of all time. Often hailed as Japan's finest filmmaker, Kurosawa is known for a vast variety of phenomenal stories that are still celebrated to this day. He's a filmmaker who has very well deserved his place in the history of cinema, as his work utilizes masterful storytelling, compelling characters, striking visuals, impressive production values, and superb editing. Just take a look at the grandness of Seven Samurai, the complexity of Rashomon, the intensity of High and Low, the phenomenal scope of Ran, the somber yet subdued nature of Ikiru, or the quick action of Yojimbo. Kurosawa was another one of those filmmakers who always had a tendency to work with certain people, much like how Song Kang-ho is always working with Bong Joon-ho, or how Michael Caine is always working with Christopher Nolan. Kurosawa frequently worked with many renowned Japanese actors and actresses, including Toshiro Mifune, Tetsuya Nakadai, Setsuko Hara, Isuzu Yamada, and Takashi Shimura. Another thing about Kurosawa is that as an artist, as a filmmaker, he's known for being a perfectionist. While this partly ensures the quality of whatever movie of his you're watching, it also means that he was sometimes difficult to work with behind the scenes. Kurosawa, believe it or not, has in fact made a couple of tokusatsu films. Throne of Blood, an adaptation of William Shakespeare's Macbeth, heavily utilizes special effects, which were notably directed by Eiji Tsuburaya. And his samurai epic, Kagemusha, also uses tokusatsu for some of the imagery, mainly the iconic dream sequence. But perhaps his most well-known tokusatsu film, which is also not only his most personal, but also what I consider to be his best movie, is his 1990 anthology film, Dreams. Dreams was distributed by Toho and had a tremendous budget for a Japanese production at about 1.3 billion yen, or about $12 million. This was certainly massive, especially for 1990. This is actually thanks to international funding from Warner Brothers, as well as George Lucas and Steven Spielberg themselves. And one of the first things one would notice about Dreams is its high production value, considering that Kurosawa was also known for having big budgets for his films, to the point where he would sometimes go either over budget for the studio, pay out of his own pockets, or both. This international support likely lessened some stress. Dreams is a very unique entry in Kurosawa's filmography, as it's a collection of different stories that somewhat have a consistent narrative, as the main character in each dream is supposed to be a fictional depiction of Akira Kurosawa himself from his childhood years to his adult life. Each dream also has a theme that represents something personal about him. Rather than coming off as self-indulgent and pretentious, it is instead incredibly humane with its magical realist approach. And on top of that, there's 8 of these segments, and they're all inspired by real dreams Kurosawa had in his life. The style of the film is very reminiscent of Masaki Kobayashi's Kwaidan, with its use of color, set pieces, and episodic storytelling. Dreams, however, is told from a more personal level, as explained earlier. The film features Mitsunori Isaki and Akira Terao, who play Kurosawa as a child and adult respectively, and were also present in Ran prior to this. Another thing worth noting is that Kurosawa's lifelong friend and collaborator Ishiro Honda also worked on this film as a creative consultant. On to the first dream. Sunshine through the rain. A young boy goes out into a forest against his mother's wishes and sees a wedding procession of the kitsune. This story is about childhood curiosity, which is something I'm sure we can all relate to. Also, the young boy's home is supposedly based on Kurosawa's real childhood home. So did Kurosawa just dox himself? This segment alone is very wonderful with how it handles its themes and its magnificent cinematography. Also, does this shot look familiar? Up next, the peach orchard. On the day of Hinamatsuri, a young boy checks in on his sister and her friends and notices that there are 6 dolls, but only 5 of them. He sees the missing 6th girl, but she suddenly disappears. He eventually sees her again and follows her, only to be confronted by dolls that have taken on a sort of human form, speaking for the spirits of the dead peach trees that were in his family's orchard. There's certainly a theme of death, but also rebirth, as whenever something dies, their soul is still manifested in some form, as it transcends all matter. Especially as the dolls dance to Etenraku, which makes the trees appear once more. The segment is definitely more colorful than the previous, and comes off as being more unique with its narrative and how it's shot. The music is very nice too. Then, the blizzard. 4 men climb a mountain, and they begin to succumb to these harsh conditions one by one as a snowstorm arrives. The last one remaining eventually comes face to face with the Yuki Onna of Japanese folklore. You might remember her from Kwaidan. Here she's played by Mieko Harada, who played Lady Kaede in Kurosawa's previous film Ran. The snowy mountain climb is a metaphor for overcoming struggles. This is very personal for Kurosawa, as he himself struggled with depression and even attempted suicide on one occasion. He thankfully pulled through with the support of loved ones, including his friend Ishiro Honda. I absolutely adore the ambiance in this one, as it comes off as very eerie, and the lack of music just makes it a little disturbing and real. I love it. I also love the track that plays when Yuki Onna appears. And I really like that this one ends on a very hopeful note, considering what it's supposed to represent. After that, the tunnel. A Japanese military commander is on his way home after fighting in World War II, when he sees an angry anti-tank dog come out of a tunnel and starts barking at him. He then makes his way through the tunnel, and it turns out that he's been followed by the ghost of one of his comrades and eventually sees the spirits of his entire platoon, who have also died during the event. The theme of this one is anti-war. Kurosawa was a major anti-war advocate, especially when you consider that he was forced by the Japanese government to help make propaganda films during wartime. In retrospect, he went as far as to essentially disown an earlier work of his known as The Most Beautiful as the worst mistake of his filmmaking career. I found this one to be rather haunting, as it's very subdued with how it handles the characters, and it's sad that these once hopeful men lost their lives under devastating circumstances. And you definitely feel sorry for the commander, as you can tell that he did not take pleasure in taking part in something so terrible. Moving on, Crows. A man finds himself wandering through the art of famous painter Vincent van Gogh, and eventually meets the artist himself, who's played by none other than legendary filmmaker Martin Scorsese. Yep, the Martin Scorsese behind classics such as Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Goodfellas. And you know what? He does a great acting job here.
A scene that looks like a painting does not make a painting. If you take the time and look closely, all of nature has its own beauty. And when that natural beauty is there, I just lose myself in it. And then, as if it's in a dream, the scene just paints itself for me. Yes, I consume this natural setting. I devour it completely and whole. And then when I'm through, the picture appears before me complete. But it's so difficult to hold it inside.
Then, what do you do?
I work, I slave, I drive myself like a locomotive.
Funny enough, Scorsese is a fan of Kurosawa, so you can probably imagine how awesome it was for him to act in one of his films. Kurosawa's love for art is on full display here. The production design is just beautiful, the colors are breathtaking, and once again, the cinematography is gorgeous. Now we continue with Mount Fuji in red. A nuclear power plant nearby Mount Fuji is melting down while civilians seek shelter, and it's not long before the mountain begins to erupt. This particular dream stems from Kurosawa's fear of a nuclear apocalypse, and it's very haunting, especially as we see the aftermath of the whole incident. This portion of the film just feels absolutely hopeless. It's also worth noting that the businessman is played by Hisashi Egawa, who acted in some of Kurosawa's previous films, including Dodeskaren and Ran. Then there's the Weeping Demon. This one almost feels like a follow-up to Mount Fuji in red. A man is wandering through a barren mountainside when he confronts a mutant of sorts. A cross between a man and an Oni, it appears, who explains that there's been a nuclear apocalypse. Plus, these mutants are actually people suffering from severe radiation mutations and burns, and it's implied that they've resorted to cannibalism. This one stems from Kurosawa's fear of mankind destroying itself through nuclear war and its effects on people. Not exactly as hopeless as Mount Fuji in red, but still incredibly bleak. And just as haunting with how it's shot, and Jesus, those cries are disturbing. And finally, Village of the Watermills. A man in a village meets an old man, played by Chishu Ryu, who acted in countless films directed by Yasujiro Ozu, such as Late Spring, Tokyo Story, and An Autumn Afternoon. The old man explains that the titular village of Watermills has decided to abandon technology and remain in their simpler ways. Meanwhile, a funeral is held for a woman who passed away, and as opposed to mourning, everyone celebrates the long, fulfilling life she had. This story is about the beauty of life, how death is a necessary component to it as well, and how it's up to us to make the very best of it. Honestly, a beautiful way to conclude the film. As I stated earlier, I believe that Dreams is Akira Kurosawa's best movie, as not only is it very personal, but conveys its themes of life, death, legacy, spirituality, and the preservation of nature so beautifully. And this is all thanks to its incredible production design, wonderful acting performances, brilliant soundtrack, excellent cinematography, phenomenal color palettes, and it's all executed at such a smooth pace. Everything about this movie is just perfection. But what do you guys think? Have you seen Dreams? What is your favorite Akira Kurosawa film? Drop a comment, and if you like what you see, then definitely consider supporting me on Patreon, where for a single dollar, your name can appear at the end of every future upload, and get access to my Discord server. Other than that, you can also get early access to videos, exclusive content, commission video requests, and receive a t-shirt of your choice from my TeePublic. Also, big thanks to Sean once again for the sweet editing job. You and Cole are the dudes. And once I reach enough patrons, I'll do a video covering several unmade Godzilla films, so if that's something you'd like to see, then go support me on Patreon. Feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and this is TitanGoji, signing off.